Thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce Toker. And I think maybe we met at some point of time in Hamburg. It was probably like one of my first ever seminar in economics after I joined his research group at the University of Kiel in 2001. So nevertheless, let me say something about Toker. So Toker is right now, as you all know, a professor at the University of Würzburg, where he has the chair of industrial economics. He has received his PhD degree from State University of New York at Stony Brook in 1998. And afterwards, he had a few positions at University of Kiel, where we met at the group that he led at that point of time, doing research on network industries, which was funded by Volkswagen Stiftung. Then he moved as well as our group to University of Munich. Later, he worked at Bogazici University in Istanbul, University of Southern Denmark, and finally he settled at the University of Würzburg. So as I said, I met Toker at the University of Kiel at a research group that was funded by Volkswagen Stiftung that was conducting research on network industries. And Toker is a unique researcher in the sense that he conducts both empirical and theoretical research, which is very rare, and he can publish well in both fields. So since then, I also myself with Toker had a number of projects and we continue working together. In terms of research, I guess most of you know this. He published in many journals, including International Journal of Industrialization, Quantitative Marketing Economics, Information Economics Policy, Review of Industrialization, European Journal of Operation Research, and others. So this paper is empirical paper that will be presented by Toker. It's a joint work with, as I understand, his PhD student Rico Deal and a collaborator and co-worker from University of Würzburg, Firat Doganoglu. And that paper deals with an important issue of estimating markups empirically. So this was major focus in structural industrialization since years to estimate markups, both for sake of assessing market conduct, also for mergers, and for other issues of vertical relations, let's say. Its primary focus in obviously competition authorities to have an idea about competitiveness of the markets. However, in terms of empirical approach, this is obviously challenging because it requires usually very detailed data on demand, and this data is rarely available, especially sales from public market sources. So this is either very difficult to purchase and expensive, or must be provided by companies. So that's why I also feel personally that there's relatively little research on structural industrialization. The reason being exactly the demand on and the type of data that is required. So in this paper, Toker relies on methodology that was developed to overcome these limitations, methodology by Delocker and others, where this research attracted lots of attention in the last years. And the advantage of it is that it does not rely on demand data and does not make assumptions that are required to be made in case of using price elasticity to estimate conduct, which is exactly using price elasticity to estimate markups, which is exactly assumptions about conduct. So this paper rather relies on data that might be publicly available, such as balance sheets, and estimates instead of demand function, production functions. Nevertheless, this approach also requires a number of assumptions. I'm sure Toker will discuss this. And in this specific paper, he applies this methodology to study markups in Germany, in various industries and in various geographic areas. So I'm looking forward also myself to hear more about the methodology. I know not enough about this, and I think it will be very important in the future empirical research.
First of all, thank you very much to all of you coming, taking your afternoon, early evening to listen to me talk about some new things that I learned and new things that I'm working on. Thank you very much, Manfred, for asking me to do this. It made me also organize some thoughts, and hopefully we're gonna sort of introduce some new ideas if you don't know them already. If not, with the twists that we are exploring in our research, maybe you can give us some constructive feedback on how to proceed. So the the basic theme, we could go back to a column written by Paul Krugman in 2013. Right. At the time, there were some observations where firms were making extra normal profits. Right. The share of workers' earnings in the total production have been declining, and in this column, he sort of ties this all these developments to increasing market power of firms. Right. Firms were becoming more and more acting like monopolists, and hence were able to restrict their production, and the profits was not essentially coming from sort of expanding production, introducing new goods, or so it was basically coming through exercise of market power. And at the time, as Lucas said, there were some methods to measure how market power is evolving, but to the required data using typical methods that we use in industrial organization, it was very difficult to construct a time series of how market power evolves in time and so on. Of course, Krugman did not come up just with this idea. People were discussing this, and there were several people sort of working on the idea on how we could sort of come up with ways of doing this. And one of those persons with a very, very sort of consistent research agenda was Jan de Lecker. Yeah, so at the time he was in Princeton, he's now at Leuven. And first, this graph appeared in 2018 in a working paper, which got published in 2020 in QJE, which essentially shows that starting from the 1980s, right, there's a huge increase in market power as measured as the ratio of prices to marginal cost. Okay, so it was like around 1.18, they say, and it ended up by 1.65 in early 2000s, 2010s. This picture was everywhere, right? In the last years of 2010s, everywhere we saw this picture, and this is hailed as one of the most important papers in the last decade, right? Because the message is very important. Yes, the market power is increasing, and therefore it's also a call, it's a fact. When one establishes this as a fact, one can start thinking about why this is happening, right? Uh, it also introduced a very, very clever method to build this picture, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, because our research derives, or our point of divergence is what they did, right? And we're not alone in this, right? They sort of started a complete new literature about this, and there are many new papers being written to use, which use this methodology or which tries to extend this methodology. So when Manfred asked me, I thought about what to present. Just presenting the methods perhaps wouldn't have been a good idea for a seminar series like this. But I think the challenges in the methodology is important to acknowledge. So that's why I wanted to first briefly mention how we typically measured market power as industrial economists before De Lecker, right? And then what has he done which made these new observations possible, right? Uh, so this first part is going to be a little bit of survey of how one does things. So that's not mine, but I very much enjoyed learning about both strands of the literature. And then I'm going to finish with a little bit of summary of what we have done with my doctoral student Rico Deal and my colleague Frat Injoglu here from both University of Würzburg, and I'm going to finish with a few future research ideas where we want to go, and perhaps that could also kick off a discussion. Okay, so why is market power so bad? Because essentially it means the ability of a firm to set prices away from marginal cost, right? We know that in well-functioning markets, prices approach costs, right? And then we want markets to live there, but it's not always possible to achieve that for various reasons, of course. But in the long run, this is what we want to end up, right? And a nice sort of measure of market power, typically one could think of as the Lerner index, which essentially measures the difference of price from cost as a ratio to the price itself. And in the old days, people have used these measures using balance sheet data essentially to construct sort of an average measure of this, right? So if you take the ratio of the difference between revenues to cost, the profit to revenues, you would exactly end up with a term like Lerner index, and it's going to inform us about the competitiveness of a market. And typically, in the old days, people have constructed such measures for each firm for in different industries, and sort of tried to explore the characteristics of the industries which led to market power. But this sort of the things on the left hand side and on the right hand side of these things, the industry characteristics and so on, are typically highly related. So it was very difficult to come up with causal relationships, and therefore it fell out of fashion and left its place in starting with 1980s to what we call the new empirical industrial organization literature. And this literature sort of focused on not industries but an industry, right? An industry which sells similar products, say, and different products, right? And for each of these products, we could have a demand function which depends on the price of the product itself and the price of all other n minus one products in this industry. Right? And suppose each of these products are produced by one firm, just for simplicity, it's easy to extend this to multi-product firms. And suppose each product has a constant marginal cost CI, then the idea was, okay, we now have learned about game theory. It's 1980s. The game theory revolution is taking place. We know all about oligopolistic models of competition. We could pick one of those models and construct the profit function of these firms and sort of assume a particular model of competition and see what the implied equilibrium prices should look like, right? So the next step is that therefore to construct a condition for profit maximization. So the mathematics is not that important, but yeah, the maximum profits occurs when the slope of the profit is zero. So we end up with a condition on these functions, which one could rearrange to show that price should be equal to marginal cost plus a markup term, right? So it's plus because this demand derivative, the change in demand when you increase the price should be a negative number. So negative, negative, a positive markup should be added to the marginal cost to obtain the equilibrium price. Okay, so in fact, when you sort of notice here, right, this additional markup involves only the demand function that I started assuming with and the prices that arise in equilibrium, right? So it's solely a demand side thing, right? So therefore, if our goal is to measure price cost differences, this approach says we should go ahead and learn about demand. If we know about demand, right, and if we are ready to make an assumption regarding how competition in the market takes place, we could compute this markup, and that gives us the market power essentially. In fact, if you want to write it in the Lerner index form, we could rearrange all this expression for whatever model of competition you want to assume. You will end up with an expression like I have here, right, where the Lerner index is going to be proportional to the inverse demand elasticity. right? So this epsilon I here is the elasticity of demand, how much demand would change if I increase my prices slightly. Okay, so the whole thing is, first of all, if we could observe marginal costs, right, we wouldn't have need any of these. We could directly measure market power if we sort of go with the Lerner index. But it's typically very difficult to observe costs. Okay, therefore, the idea was to go ahead and estimate demand side things, because this is something we could do very well, right? The methods to do this were well established. The econometric methodology were there. You can think of all kinds of endogeneity problems and take care of them. You can allow people to be different and so on, right? So the idea was to go ahead and estimate demand. Given demand, I could compute markups, I could compute elasticities, right? And as a result, I can have a measure of the left-hand side, right? The price-cost differences and so on. And indeed, when you go back to this expression here, right, if elasticity is very high, this right-hand side is going to go towards zero, and prices are going to approach marginal cost, right? So we're going to find ourselves in a competitive environment. But if firms are oligopolistic, where they have some market power, this methodology allows one to measure that, right? But obviously, whatever market power we measure sort of relies on the model of competition we impose, right? If we impose quantity competition, or if we impose price competition, the way we compute these elasticities would differ, right? So as a result, um, uh, it's an important step. It requires a very strong assumption. How do we know conduct? But if you are ready to make that assumption, and if you can reliably estimate demand, this sort of methodology was a sure thing. It sounds good on paper. It works very well with data if you have done as well. But what it requires is really detailed data, right? And when you go look at published papers, typically you found a lot of papers on flavored yogurt and so on, and you cannot talk about automotive industry or something, right? So you can really focus on a few product categories with available demand information. There are some recent sort of developments where some large databases became available, where you can go ahead and estimate elasticities all over the place. But typically, this was a huge constraint, okay? Because it's essential to estimate demand. It's very difficult to do it, right? Because of data limitations. And if you're just able to estimate demand for flavored yogurt, right, it's going to be also difficult to address falling labor share in industries. Okay, so that asking socially relevant questions are very difficult. So therefore, there was a need really to change this. And there comes the Deloker methodology. He consistently started in early 2000s with a few little papers, but the first paper comes in 2012 in AR with Warszynski, and then in 2016 he has an econometrica paper with Penelope Goldberg, and the end of this journey is the QJ paper from 2020, but that all relies on an idea from Hall. I wrote 1998, it should read 1988. Uh, uh, it says, why don't we sort of not look at profit maximization, but cost minimization, right? And in fact, the basic approach says, why don't we assume that firms are price takers in input markets, right? When they buy labor, when they buy capital, when they buy materials, they buy this. They are each of them are very small in relation to the market, so therefore they are price takers. They cannot influence input prices. They have their production technology. So for simplicity, I'm going to go on with labor and capital, right? And what they're going to try to do is that for every output level Q that they want to produce, they want to minimize their costs. Okay, so we could write their maximization problem like this, where this constraint here, this is the Lagrangian, this would be their cost, right? Wage rate times labor plus cost of capital times capital is the cost, but they want to do this in a way to produce Q units of output given their production technology. And so in this constraint optimization problem, the lambda, the Lagrange multiplier, has a very nice interpretation. It's the shed of cost of relaxing the constraint by 1 unit. So when you notice the constraint, it's essentially the constraint is what happens if I expand output by 1 unit by changing the input, right? So as a result, this Lagrange multiplier essentially measures the marginal cost of this firm at the end of the day. And so the methodology starts first with this observation. And then if I want to maximize this, say with respect to labor, right, I'm going to just take the first order condition of this and try to solve it. And the implied condition says the wage rate must equal to my marginal cost times the marginal product of labor. Right? So we could manipulate this expression a little by multiplying both sides by the number of units of labor you buy. So on the left-hand side now we have the whole labor expenses. We could divide both sides by the revenue of the firm, right? Then we end up with this funny looking expression, but there's a point to this, so bear with me, right? Um, so if we sort of rearrange this expression, we can rewrite it in this form, right? On the left-hand side, I collected the ratio of price to marginal cost. Yeah? So the markup that we want to measure essentially, which is a measure of market power. If this deviates from 1 significantly, then we would say we have market power. Here I have sort of the output elasticity with respect to the labor input, given my production technology, which is possible to compute if I had access to the production function. And this thing in the red is my revenue divided my expenses for labor. Okay, so essentially, if I call the left-hand side the markup, the first term here, the output elasticity with respect to my variable input, and this term, 1 over this term, the share of cost in revenue, right, alpha, then I have a very simple expression, right? And this expression, when I sort of put it with any general variable input, right, is going to look like this. I would have three components. One is revenue, which is I observe in balance sheet data. Yeah? Firms have to, especially publicly traded firms, have to publish these things, but you can get these things from many other sources, right? Even there's like a federal census of firms in every European country that you can go get this balance sheet information essentially. Right? So the numerator, I have the revenue. In the denominator, I have the expenses to the variable input I have, right? So if I'm talking about labor, it would be my wage bill. So these things are things I observe in publicly available data sets, right? In balance sheets. This is the output elasticity with respect to this variable input that I need to estimate using methods of production function estimation. But luckily enough, right, the methods to do that rely on also balance sheet data. Okay, so if I have access to balance sheet data, I can estimate my output elasticity. I observe revenues, I observe the expenses for the input in consideration. This put all together should give me the market power of the firm. So I can infer the unobservable market power of the firm, right? So in a way, this is completely orthogonal to what empirical industrial organization methods used to do, coming from the demand side. This comes from the other side, and the data requirements to make this inference is much, much lighter, right? I can go ahead at the university. We have Thomson Reuters screens that we could use to download data, balance sheet data for industries in Germany, industries in Europe. In a matter of days, I could start doing something like this for a wide range of industries. So that's what makes this new method so exciting. The other one requires expensive data, detailed data on demand, on sales, on prices, on product characteristics, and so on. This requires just balance sheet data. Okay. An important sort of observation that we have to make here is the following: that whatever variable input I use, the markup I should measure should be the same, right? That's a, a neat implication of the cost minimization approach, right? So it doesn't matter if I use material or labor or a combination of these inputs as my variable input, I should come up with the same inferred markup, okay? Which we would exploit later on to move forward. Okay, so the sticky point perhaps here is the estimation of production functions, right? This is a literature on its own. It's huge, methodologically difficult. There are many issues like endogeneity. We have solved these problems thanks to the work by Olli Pekes and the people who have contributed to that line of research. Um, we typically observe in balance sheet revenue, but not direct outputs, while production functions are defined on outputs. There are ways of dealing with that, accepted ways of dealing with that by deflating with the proper price indices and so on. We can go back to quantities. There are differentiated products and not homogeneous products. There are oligopolistic markets. There are all ways of dealing with that, but it's not the point I want to make today here. That methodology is not our goal. That methodology is very recently, actually, there's a handbook chapter in the new Handbook of Industrial Organization in the fourth volume by Deloker and Syverson on how to do this. Yeah. So let's assume we could go ahead and estimate these output elasticities reliably. If we have that, and if we have balance sheet data, then we can easily come up with market power estimates, right? So the only assumption that we make here is cost minimization and price taking behavior in input markets. If you want to contrast this with new empirical industrial organization methods, we make assumptions regarding how firms compete, right? And we require profit maximization and equilibrium assumptions, right? And lots of demand side data. Here, we make cost minimization, we make price taking behavior in input markets as assumptions, right? And we require only publicly available data. So this makes it much easier, right? And I could construct easily time series of markups. I could easily construct time series of markups for different industries and so on. And that obviously opens up a lot of new directions, right? The method is well-founded, theory-based, nevertheless relatively simple way to measure market power, right? And if that's what we are interested in over time, it's dynamics and so on. It's a good thing to have. So thanks, Deluca. So he has not stopped there, of course. He has used this method to do other things. So this is a picture from their 2020 paper where they compare their method, right? The red curve is their method, right? And these dots here are estimates obtained by the demand side measurement of markups, and they say, okay, at least we are in the same ballpark with them. But you see that the red curve is a time series over 40 years, right? And the demand side methods give us these numbers only at certain snapshots of the time. So that's very useful. Another thing Delocar with his co-author actually in the 2020 paper, Eckhout, did is they use their production function estimates from their paper, assume that they apply to the whole world, right? And they constructed sort of a global market power map, right? And as you see that in the US, in Russia, it seems to be a big problem. In Mexico, Canada, yes. Europe, we are actually relatively fine, right? The markups are only moderate, right, in comparison, but nevertheless, they are also, yeah, they're sort of 25% markups are still no joke, right? But anyways, so the simplicity of methodology makes it very easy to produce such pictures, and it's attractive. We could talk about geographic sort of distribution of market power, etc. But of course, people then started working with this methodology only to see that, okay, so there are some issues, right? So this is a paper from Raval where he looks at market power in Chile, right? And that he computes the markups with labor input, with materials input, right, and a composite input. And he argues that they are all different, right? Uh, Here are some pictures of the same kind of comparison. So the material markups using material as input in red and labor in black from Demirar 2020, they are also different, right? So this one condition that we had, regardless of which input you use, the markups has to be the same, right? Uh, they are not always like that. It doesn't turn out to be the case always. So in fact, that's sort of the point of digression in our research as well. We said, okay, let's try to look at these things in Germany. We went and we collected data, as I said, from Thomson Reuters, right? We focused on three industries. Sort of the Nike's codes are 31, 32, 33. These are all manufacturing industries, right? And the results that we have found, right? Again, the black curve here is our material markup. The yellow curve is the markup that we compute using Delocar methodology, using labor as input, right? They tend to be different, okay? And this is a problem, right? This sort of says at least for these industries, the assumptions that Delocar employed must be wrong somewhere, right? And people have tried to explore why this is happening. One of the suggestion is that the technology may be changing, and if you ignore this, right, if labor augmenting technology change takes place, right, labor can become more efficient, and if you ignore these changes in the underlying technology, such differences in measured markups are expected, right? There are a few other things in a paper we explore, and we argue that this actually does not apply to the observations in Germany, and we extend the alternative idea. Meanwhile, others have done this as well. We say one problem with this could be that these firms perhaps are not price takers in input markets, right? Perhaps they are actually able to manipulate, say, the wages of the workers they hire, right? So they have some market power, monopsony power in their input markets, right? And this sort of also coincides with increased interest in the operation of labor markets all over the world, right? and not only sort of labor economists are interested in this, even industrial organization economists or competition policy economists have been debating that perhaps we should make more of we should be concerned more about the effects of mergers on labor markets and so on. And there's increasing sort of evidence which shows that yes, we do have an issue with monopsony power in many markets. A recent paper in Germany sort of suggests that there is typically an urban wage premium, but the cause of this, they say, is because of the uh, density of firms competing for workers in large cities. When there are many firms working, competing for the same pool of workers, right, they would have to earn more. This paper is going to play a role later on. They kindly shared some estimates they have with us, which we are going to employ in this context to make sense of some of the numbers that we compute later on. So I'm going to come back to Hirsch et al. Paper in a second. Okay, so maybe at this point, quickly, I can mention what would happen if we had sort of a possibility to influence wage rates, right? Uh, I'm not going to go through the derivation of this thing, right? But now, when I choose how many workers that I employ, I'm going to be able to influence how much I have to pay them as well, right? So this is sort of the wage rate as a function of how many workers I want to hire. And uh, so if I take that into account and make the calculations again, yeah, we would end up with a terribly similar expression that we had before. Indeed, actually, what I have on the left-hand side is the markup we should be calculating. The first two terms is the markup that we calculated when we made the assumption that the firm is a price taker in the input market, and there's this additional correction that needs to be taken into account if the firm can influence wage rates by its employment decisions, right? So this eta L essentially measures the labor supply elasticity of workers in this market, right? So in a way, yeah, the same methodology could be easily extended to one where firms enjoy some market power with respect to their input providers, right? And there needs to be just a correction taken into account. So that's what we do. So this mu is the markup that we measured before. We can correct it with the labor supply elasticity to obtain the correct markup. And this again applies for any variable input that you think of computing. And again, the crucial point is that the markups that you compute from different variable inputs have to be the same. Okay, so in we just need to introduce this additional correction. Okay, so before doing this, one could exploit this equality condition, yeah, and construct sort of a relative market power measure, right? So the ratio of the market power you measure using the material input divided by the market power you measure using labor as an input uh, in our setting are things that you can compute from balance sheet data. Okay, and just assume sort of cost minimization, right? But this ratio now we show with this approach has to equal to a ratio of functions of output elasticities in different input markets. So in a way, I can measure from this whether a firm has more market power with respect to input providers in materials market or in labor market, right? Um, So the important point again is here I don't have to take any position. I can use this composite measure to see so if a firm has similar market power in both input markets, it would the ratio should be approaching one. But if one has more market power in one and less in the other, that should be different. So when we construct these measures for our three industries from the Thomson Reuters database, right, what we compute is on average, so these are on the left, you see the distributions, the densities of the estimates we have. And on the right hand side, you have sort of the evolution in time. And this measure is always less than one, right? And we do so measure them significantly less than one. So the implication of this is the market power firms have in these three industries in Germany in labor markets exceeds those that they have in the materials market. Okay, so this kind of indicates that there is, at least in these three manufacturing industries in Germany, we may have a monopsony problem. Okay, and the nice thing about about this uh, relative market power measure that I'm trying to advance here is we don't have to make a lot of assumptions regarding supply elasticities and so on, right? So as long as I have significantly values significantly smaller than one, that indicates monopsony power, and the evolution I can use to explore how monopsony power changes with certain things, right? So in the meantime, there are several papers using similar kind of methods, but there's one very appealing sort of assumption that one could employ. One could say, okay, so maybe Deluca and co-authors weren't so wrong to assume that firms don't have much market power in some market, right? For example, in materials, right? You may be buying from world markets, everything. So therefore, a small firm in Germany is not going to have a lot of market power there, but the firm is going to be hiring locally. And if it's one of the largest employers in the commuting zone in the area that they are residing, they may have very much labor market power, right? So therefore, what we taught and what others have taught to do is to say, okay, let's assume we don't have material market power. So from material as a variable input, together with the Deluca methodology, we could measure correct market power in the output markets, the markups. Using this as the correct measure and using the markups computed based on price taking assumption, we could recover perhaps labor supply elasticities, which essentially allows us to sort of measure the monopsony power, right? So we assume the material markup is the correct markup. Then since labor markup and the material markup measured correctly has to be equal, we could solve for the labor supply elasticity as follows, and that gives us an indication about the sort of nature of monopsony power in these markets, right? So if this is going to be a large number, right, then we are going to end up with wages deviating from their marginal product significantly. And our estimates show that we do have moderate market power in the three industries that we studied. Right, so this indicates in these three industries, which I think this is production of food products and textiles. This produces wood, paper, and chemicals, and this is more metal and sort of electronic products and machine parts and so on. In all these three industries, it seems that we do see a market power problem. Right? So how am I doing on time, by the way? Am I over my limit, or can I go about 10 minutes more?
We have no limits.
Okay.
Go on.
Okay. Good. So, intrigued by these findings, we said, okay, let's try to explore this with some other data set, because Thomson Reuters data has its limitations, right? So, we are in Würzburg, not so far from Nuremberg. We said, and therefore I had colleagues that constantly work with IAB data, and they have exquisite data sets. So we were able to, and anyone can actually, as long as you have a good research idea, we got access to the IAB establishment panel, which is essentially a representative sample of plants in Germany, right? And for each of these plants, they do have basic balance sheet information, right? One problem, of course, in this data set is I don't know if two plants are owned by the same firm, right? So in our approach, we're gonna treat each of the plants as separate entities, which may not be completely correct, but given that the overwhelming number of firms have single plants, uh, yeah, on average we should be okay, we think, right? But with the caveat, we sort of went with this data set to uh, estimate production functions, right? Again, assume price taking behavior, estimate markups, and test whether they are equal, right? And as I suggested earlier, in some, yeah, they are equal, in some, they are not, right? So if they are not equal, and if they're not equal in the correct way, right, we could use that to infer labor supply elasticities, right? And that will allow us to have make a point towards monopsony power in these markets, right? So this approach allows us to produce four possible things, right? We could produce productivity, and since these are all plants, right, we would be able to produce this in a on a map of Germany, right? So we would have a geographic distribution of these things. We would be able to produce a geographic distribution of markups. We would be able to produce a measure of relative market power, the ratio of these two. Yeah? And if we are willing to make an assumption that firms are price takers in material markets, we could in fact come up with a monopsony power measure, right? And we can produce this at commuting zone levels or district levels, right? So the first picture I want to show you is the uh, geographical distribution of productivity as measured by our production function estimation, right? So this is what remains if we take, so the total factor productivity measure is here. And then we do see that there is quite a bit of variation. There are more productive regions. The darker colors sort of indicate higher productivity, right? The gray areas, we don't have no information about them, so therefore they don't appear here, right? But this picture, one can then go back, right, and explore with sort of variables that determine these regional characteristics and see whether there is some inherent geographic determinant of productivity. And in fact, that's going to be a theme that I would like to stress. We have not done yet that with productivity, but that's certainly a possibility, is to explore geographical determinants, right? Um, the next picture is the markups that we compute, right, from materials as input, right? And so the color, the dominant color is somewhere here, right? And this is actually relatively consistent with Delocar's findings that 25% markup or so on. So in Germany, the market power in output markets is not a terrible problem, right? It's not like 1.67, it's 1.2, right? And in the US, what they found, which was alarming, is the price cost ratios were around 1.8 or so. Okay, so in Germany, it looks as if the uh, the market power in output markets is moderate, right? There is some, but not of too much of a concern, perhaps. But of course, as I mentioned, right, if I measured the same thing with labor as variable input, I should get the same thing, and the picture has a different color, right? So consistent with the pictures we have seen from our other data set, right? The darker parts imply a higher markup, right? And this is saying to us that labor as a variable input delivers us a higher markup if we assume price taking behavior in labor markets, right? And indeed, what I told you, this relative market power measure is this graph divided by this graph, essentially, if you will, right? And when you do that, we're going to switch colors here, because the red areas indicate the areas where labor market power in labor markets of firms are higher than their market power in material markets, while the blue when this is reverse, right? So the red areas here indicate those areas in Germany we may have a concern, right, regarding labor market power. But this is just taking the numbers, right? This is not making any tests of significance and so on, right? So whether this ratio is sufficiently far away from one is not in the picture. So that I would take with a grain of salt and show you this picture instead. Right, in this picture, right, we sort of the first column is the industry codes, and of course it had to be, but these are differently coded than the Thomson Reuters. These are NACE codes. Thomson Reuters was Nike's codes. So anyways, so the first column is the cases where we cannot reject the hypothesis that the two markups are equal, right? The second column are the cases where we find markups measured by using labor as a variable input is significantly higher than markups measured as materials as a variable input. And the third column is where markups measured as materials as variable inputs exceed those of markups measured with labor as a variable input. As you see in this table, first of all, in Germany, the sort of assumption that markups are equal are really hard to reject. Right? There are only a cluster of industries, this 26, 27, 28, where we see that labor market power seems to be significantly larger than market power measured with materials. And this is the indication of monopsony power, right? And interestingly enough, if you go look at the characterization of industries 26, 27, 28, they match with the three industries in the Thomson Reuters dataset, right? They are predominantly manufacturing industries, right? So if we restrict our attention to these, as the first output perhaps is the identification of these three industries, right? They are the industries in Germany where perhaps we should be concerned with monopsony power, right? And it turns out, based on these significant observations, when we draw a map of monopsony problem in Germany, we could also locate them, right? So the next thing was, okay, so if we can find this pockets of monopsony power geographically, right? can we explain this with some geographic characteristics, with some market characteristics, right? So it turned out the typical variables like population density, the area, the number of firms, and so on, has been uninformative. So that's a bit disappointing. So far, the only sort of explanation that we find is that if we sort of control for state fixed effects or commuting zone fixed effects or district or Kreis fixed effects, we find some explanatory power, which indicates that there is some idiosyncratic geographic variation. Of course, we're not satisfied with this. We would like to be able to explain what makes a district more likely to have firms behaving like monopsonist firms. This is still ongoing, right? So if you have suggestions on how we could, what we could check there, I would be very much interested to hear. And maybe the last thing I quickly explain to you is our next step, right? So I mentioned this paper by Hirsch et al. What they do essentially is also estimate the labor supply elasticity. I wrote labor market, but it should be labor supply elasticities. And they do this at the commuting zone level in Germany using again EAB data, but not the establishment data, but the workers data, right? So it's a different data set, right? But again, they could locate each worker to their residence, their workplace, and so on, right? So they report these labor supply elasticities at commuting zone level, right? Using the same definitions of commuting zones that we use. And so we thought then we could perhaps use their numbers, right? And look how we compare, right? We can try to check whether what we obtain as labor supply elasticity based on our assumption of price-taking behavior in material markets, how do they compare with labor supply elasticities computed from recruitment and separation rates of workers that they read from the EAB worker database, right? And so let me show you the findings. So the green curves are the curves from Hirsch et al. Study. So first of all, they do not have one measure, they report 4 measures. And these 4 measures, these are the distribution of elasticities, right? They do significantly differ from one another. They don't take a position with which one they prefer, right? The steepest curve here is the density of labor supply elasticities in cases we find a significant difference between markups. The smaller red curve, again, still nevertheless shifted to the left, is the labor supply elasticity we sort of ignorantly compute without checking for significance, right? So our results and their results don't seem to be matching very well, right? But again, I feel that all is not lost, right? Collectively, their results and our results suggest that the labor supply elasticity is less than 4, right? And in some cases, significantly less than 4, less than 2 even, right? And this points to a monopsony problem that we may be worried about. Yeah, and this calls for further research, right? But what we said is then, okay, yeah, maybe we're wrong, right? Maybe we are wrong in making the assumption that firms have no market power in buying materials, right? But now they give us labor supply elasticities. Using them, we could compute correct markups using labor as a variable input, and then look what happens, right? And this is what you get when you compute markups, right? This is the markups from Hirsch et al. Study. This is the markups we would compute, right, using their labor market elasticity. So at least in terms of support, right, they are of the similar order of magnitude. Right? So that sort of makes us feel a little bit comfortable with at least proceeding with this, right? Because again, the Deluca methodology offers a very quick and dirty way to get to labor supply elasticities. Right? If we could even get an indication where we might have a problem, right? If we could even identify that, then one could go ahead and use the larger databases, do demand side estimation, or do labor supply elasticity calculations using data from workers and so on, which are typically much larger data sets and more difficult to deal with, right? But nevertheless, there's still a lot to do. So with that, let me conclude, right? Um, so I find the methodology offered by Deluca and co-authors, right, to be an extremely useful contribution, right? Because they allow us to access things that we do not observe typically by using theoretically well-founded models and publicly available data, right? So if our goal is to sort of identify, do a first check of things, right? Uh, it's perfectly fine to use their methodology, right? Of course, after all these issues that I mentioned, it would be difficult to say, okay, that's the definitive word. Of course, we should be very careful in interpreting the results, right? At the end of the day, there is a mountain of assumptions that goes into coming up with these numbers. I didn't go into detail about production function estimation, but like when you really study the methods there, these methods are bordering like a little bit on magic, right? They are the fact that they should work, right, is sometimes surprise to even people who do it, right? But at the end, what this methodology provides us is perhaps what is necessary input for serious economic discussion, right? Because it can provide us with a time series of measures regarding productivity, measures regarding market power in output markets, measure regarding market power in input markets, right? Over time and over geography in a relatively low cost fashion, right? So as a result, I do think that one should explore these options, right? One idea is the relative market power idea that I mentioned earlier. It could be really useful if one could construct time series of it and sort of explore how that relative market power changes with certain things, right? Which I'm going to give you a few ideas about what we have in mind. And yeah, the finding that monopsony in some industries, especially these particular manufacturing group of industries, is an issue, and in some locations in Germany, I think is also a call for further research and perhaps some action. Right? So what do we want to do with this? One idea is to explore the introduction and increases in minimum wages in Germany that we have observed in the recent past, again on productivity markups and monopsony power, especially in light of another very influential paper by Dustman et al., which appeared in 2021 again in QJE, which studied the introduction of minimum wages in Germany, where they find actually this introduction did not cause a loss of jobs in Germany. But what happened is inefficient firms went bankrupt, and the people who have lost their jobs then found jobs in more productive firms. So there was a reallocation of the workforce towards more productive firms, and as a result, productivity must have increased. I would very much like to test this hypothesis from a completely orthogonal sort of direction, coming from the approach that I tried to present to you. One of our ultimate goals eventually is to apply this on effects of mergers. Being an industrial economist interested in competition policy, I'm extremely interested in this, and there's increasing sort of calls for taking labor market effects of mergers into account when evaluating proposed mergers, right? And of course, it remains an interesting idea to explore the geographic determinants of the geographic variation we observe in all these. With that, I would be very much happy to take your comments or questions. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much, Toker, for your very substantial talk. Well,
Yeah, I hope I didn't
floor is
go too
open.
technical, but what can one do? That's what I do.
No,
So
no, it was, well, it's very
I try
subjective.
to minimize,
I
but
enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I mean, there was a lot of basic microeconomics which I
yeah,
understood, but I cannot follow all these elasticities,
yeah,
you know. Well,
yeah,
but maybe we have to look at it in detail if somebody is really interested in this,
yeah.
and I think we should be
I would
interested because it's a very
I can
substantial thing. Yeah,
yeah, I can share the slides for sure.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a good. I think it's an interesting subject. It's a very important one.
Yeah, and
Um,
a subject which has gone ignored quite a bit, especially in the direction of monopsony, effects of monopsony
mm,
is
yeah, yeah,
important. It's increasing its
yeah.
importance.
Yeah, I will come back to that. But first, are there any comments, questions, and so the floor is open. And a try, Ron, just go ahead, please.
Can I just make a comment, Manfred? Hello. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah, but
Yes, you can
yeah,
hear
Ron.
this? Oh, very good. Yes. No, just thank
No,
you so much.
this is
I just been
chatting.
finished
Sorry.
I've been finished reading Barry Hawk's
Mhm.
book, Monopoly in America, which
Very
came out
good.
last year, and I'd recommend it from the point of view of a practitioner of antitrust, where you work with
Mhm.
lawyers, and many of these oligopolies are putative defendants in an antitrust case. And that one of the key takeaways that Barry Hawk is looking at, going right back to the history of antitrust from 1600 right up going to different parts of the world, is, and the relevance for today's discussion, I guess, is just putting it out there, is whether or not the backbone of neoclassical economics is, it's applicable. We've seen that, you've used microeconometrics, but is it relevant to the 21st century when one is trying to understand market power
Mhm.
and monopoly?
Mhm. Toker, is it relevant?
Relevant in the sense
Well,
that we're going right back to, the Lerner
I think
index. No.
I think I'm not objective. Of course, I find it relevant.
Yes, yes.
That's my bread and butter, right? That's how
No, no, but I
I
mean, yes, it's
that's
applicable.
the
It's applicable, yes.
it is do we have to think in these terms?
I
I
think
don't
because
my
the whole raison d'etre of what you're doing is that what if a monopolist becomes the defendant in an antitrust case? Isn't that it? You
Not
know,
only that, the goal of what we want to do, where we want to go, is actually from here. First, to perhaps diagnose where do we have market power problem, and
yes,
this in
yes.
input markets and in output markets, right? So if I can verify that in some industry I have, for example, problem with monopsony power, I can try to, as a government, I can try to take some measures, or I can try to encourage unionization or something against this. First, think of it as perhaps a diagnostic method, right? That's
Yes,
how I
yes,
see it. So
yes.
I want to also understand how things change when something happens, right? So with the minimum wage, for example, what happens really, right? Because with this methodology, we could explore what happens to productivity. We could explore in the same sort of breadth, right? We could
Mm,
explore what happens to productivity, what happens to profitability, what happens to monopsony power, right? So
yes, yes.
in that sense, I find it useful.
It is. That's what I'm saying. But is it relevant? Let me just take two final
Okay.
points. If you were in an antitrust case, where I spent a lot of my life in the past 10 years, you're defending an oligopolist. So, for example, price taking. What does it actually mean? Because if you take the example of the beer industry, they are definitely a cartel. I can say that putatively, but they engage in forward buying their inputs. They're not taking prices as such. They enter in contracts and forward pricing. And the second thing that always frustrates judges is this reference to MC, marginal cost, something that cannot be measured. Accountants have no
No,
measurement of marginal cost. So we need to have a proxy. So right away you've
but
got two points that
but
undermines.
but the point here is, as you if you follow the discussion here, measurement of marginal cost is here not necessary, right?
Hmm,
All I need to measure is output elasticity with respect to an input,
yes,
the
yes,
revenues, and the, say, the wage bill or so, right? The expenditures that I make to an output. Given that I can construct the ratio of my prices to marginal cost without observing marginal cost. So in that
yes,
sense, it's
yeah.
you're right. I completely agree with you. As economists, we write C, marginal cost, and then liberally do things with it. But I have taken part in some proceedings myself. Even firms don't know what their marginal costs are,
Yes, exactly. Yes,
right?
yes, yes, yes.
So
I
of
agree.
course, things based on them, on measures that we don't really observe, are difficult things to use in practice. But perhaps it's one of the beauties of this method is it's in there, but we don't need to directly observe it.
Mm. Um,
Hmm,
I think
hmm.
to remember that Ron wanted to ask a question. Is it true? You
Yeah,
raised your hands.
yeah, I did. First of all, let me congratulate you. It's really a good paper and interesting to everyone.
Thank you.
Uh, so I really enjoyed it. The second thing is that isn't this exactly the opposite of what was supposed to happen? This is the era of globalization. This is the era of increased mobility, all kinds of more information, and so it's supposed to be the era of competition. And instead, we have this dramatic increase in monopoly. And with all the data that you have and all the interesting different cases where the increased monopoly power, is different, you could try and explore why it is that the benefits of competition haven't appeared at all. In fact, the opposite has appeared. And doesn't it destroy the case in a way for that economists have all been making for globalization and free trade? It's brought us monopoly.
Well,
Doesn't it create a
I
problem?
think what I can perhaps say is the pendulum is swinging a little bit back. Yeah? We were the ones who said globalization is going to be great, and we are the ones who are now saying, "Oh, perhaps we were wrong." I think that's a good quality to be able to say we were wrong then, and here's perhaps a better way to think about it. And I mean, we're not alone, right? There are a lot of really young young smart people, exactly acknowledging these points and saying that, uh, unions were busted throughout Western world and so on, and perhaps there was a point to them, right? And there are many papers saying that the recent sort of abolishment of non-compete contracts in the US, right? I mean, they were, for example, insane things, right? Even if you work at a fast food joint, right, you had to sign a contract saying that, okay, I'm working for McDonald's. If I quit, I'm not going to go for work for Burger King, right? Why would they need a non-compete in their contracts? But they did, and they are now abolished. And it's all due to the prominence gained by this recent line of research.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I have quite a different comment. Gregor Betz runs a company, this GB here, runs a company which does design of input markets via auctions, and these auctions were on the input side of big companies like German Railroad and so on, and Hilti or so, these input side becomes much more prominent now, I think, and the auctions become more popular. Now, it changed the markup, because, well, the trend could be that the input prices go down, that's the idea. Well, this is of course what we expect as, so to say, semi-layman on that, because yeah.
I mean,
But how does this fit then in your modeling? Would you see it, so to say, this kind of effect, if these auctions become more and more prominent, I mean, more popular, and that of course changes the market structure, in a way, and
yeah, in a way, you're right. But in a way, also given enough sort of sellers and buyers, these things should also work very much like the market that we sort of use as an abstract model of this interaction. So uh, sure, if there's a concentration of sellers or so, yeah, that it would imply certain changes in relative bargaining power of both sides. But it's difficult to say in which way things would go. I don't have an intuition so offhand to take a position on that. But if there are enough many on both sides, it should approximate the market, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, but there's in general one buyer, so to say,
Yeah.
and there are many sellers. And by this auction, well, my intuition would say that the prices go down on that market.
Yeah. So if there's one buyer, the buyer then would have profits, and his so that if this was the case, for example, and if we knew what this input was, this methodology should supposedly pick that up.
Yeah, that was
So
my
I should
question.
get yeah, I should get data probably from Gregor to see whether that happens.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know where Gregor is, but
Yeah.
well, we will see. Huh?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
There's one, I believe.
Alfred,
Can
can
you?
I?
Here, Shanti.
Yes,
Sorry,
you can see.
you're
Okay.
straight ahead.
I think
Please.
if the idea, and which I think is the idea of Toker's work, is to see if the work suggests some issues, direction of thinking about some important issues, then that is useful. It's not a question of precise measure of monopoly power, but if there are certain directions that we begin to see, then a number of important issues raised by Patrick, by Ronald, by Toker himself, can be better discussed. I can think of two immediate issues. First of all, before Germany was cursed with an active stock market like we are in Britain and America, German productivity was increasing, everything was they're doing very much better than what the stock market provided with mergers and acquisitions in the 60s and 70s. At least that's what the industrial economists said, that mergers and acquisitions did not increase productivity, improve performance of companies. But this was, of course, disputed by the finance literature looking at stock prices. But at least the issue is that, is this liberalized speculation? Speculation can be very good in economics, but is this particular line of speculation, is it on the whole something that we ought to look at more carefully? Is this what globalization has given us? And in a way, it is reducing it has not improved our productivity. And also the issue as to, are we creating a monopsony, which is not very much looked at? Because again, we look at data and we find that countries have become prosperous with globalization, but vast segment of the population is not very poor. The vast segments of the population have not somehow shared in that growth. Now, is it because the share of wages that has fallen? Was it necessary? If we try to rebalance that, are we really going to harm the economy, making it less productive? Or actually, are we going to improve it by making it more competitive? So these are the kinds of questions where you can gradually ask questions informed by numbers, however problematic some of the numbers might be, at least they may provide some basis for discussion. Are you happy with that way of looking at it?
You actually summarized my view. In fact, what you suggest is what I sort of started this whole research agenda for, right? We are very much interested in sort of looking at the effects of mergers, also on the input market side and on productivity side. And as you said, there are some papers which look at effects of mergers on productivity. There's a recent paper which looked at effects of mergers on output market power using methods like this. And my initial sort of motivation to start this line of research was exactly to take that and take into account the market power in input markets. Add to that. So in that sense, I only can agree with what you said, right? That's even if what we come up with here is not going to be 100% reliable numbers, right? They are going to tell us some things that we could uh, interpret in light of the assumptions we made, in light of the sort of preciseness of our estimates and so on, right? But at the end, it's better to incorporate the ideas uh, in thinking, just not go blindly saying that, okay, so if a merger sort of doesn't cause consumer harm, we should always let it, right? Because it may very well harm an equally large group of people on the worker side, and that should be taken into account.
Okay. Now it's more lucid. Any other question, comment? I can see none, but maybe you help me. No, there is no hand. Okay, then. Thank you very much, Toker, and thank you very much, Lukas. I mean, we didn't talk about your introduction, but as I liked it, the way it was, and I learned a lot about Toker in a way, which I didn't know. Well, we know each other, but I couldn't follow you, so to say, all your steps. So thank you very much. We are leaving, so to say, huh?
Okay, thank you very much also to all of you and listening to me.
Okay.
Yeah, just let me know. Email, I guess, is distributed,
Yeah.
right? So,
And we see next Monday. We see again. Okay. Bye.
okay.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye bye.
Bye
Good
bye,
to see you,
everyone.
Paddy.
Thank you. Bye.